Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for joining today. We will get started in just a minute to let everybody trickle in. All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Vanessa, and I am a qualitative specialist here at Statistics Solutions. And today, this webinar is going to be focused on 7 secrets to completing your dissertation in 1 year. Before we get started, if you can hear me, just pop a message in the chat to introduce yourself, and then we will begin the presentation. Okay, perfect. Great, good to meet you all. Thank you guys for joining us today. So a little bit about Statistics Solutions before we get into the content for today's presentation. We are a full service dissertation consulting and editing company. So we help PhD students with all sections of the dissertation, beginning with topic development, working through chapters 1 through 5. And we also help students with preparing their proposal presentations, their PowerPoints, and also their defense PowerPoints. We also have some different software available to students who are working on quantitative projects. So if you're a student that's doing a quant project, we do have a software available that can help you analyze your data and can really help you kind of guide you through the write-up of your results chapter. So we have a number of different services. We also have a lot of free resources on our website. So you'll notice in the chat, we've got Sierra on today. She's helping us on the back end, and she's posted some links in the chat. Please check those out. We have a lot of free blog posts, a lot of templates, more webinars related to each of the different chapters and specific statistical analysis. So check us out. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. At the end, I'll open up some time for us to go through the questions, and we can kind of work together to see if there's any areas that you need help with in your dissertation. But as far as kind of fast tracking your dissertation to complete it in a year, that is what we will focus on today. So the first key or secret that we suggest to students is to really make sure that you are developing a concrete research questions and hypotheses for your study. These research questions and hypotheses are going to be the foundation that sets the tone for your entire study. They should be written in a very clear and concise way, and should not be vague, because everything that you do stems from ensuring that you are in the scope of these research questions. So, for example, if you are studying, maybe you want to study the perceptions of teachers who were teaching during COVID-19. Having that very clear and defined research question is going to ensure that when you go out to collect your data, you're not kind of getting in the weeds and exploring perceptions related to different subjects related to those teachers. So really making sure you have those detailed research questions is going to be an important piece here. To create research questions that make sense for your study and that kind of keep you reined in and keep you within a very narrow scope, it's going to be important to take a deep dive into the literature. So you should begin your dissertation process by reading relevant articles to the topic or area of study and trying to get a really good and comprehensive understanding of what research has been completed on that particular topic. So for example, I had said perceptions of teachers during COVID-19. Most likely the literature pool on that topic is not so large. So if I was conducting a literature search, on that topic, I would be looking to see what papers have people explored teachers during COVID-19. In those papers, what topics are coming up? You know, is it that they had limited resources, they were afraid to go to school, they were struggling with attrition from students? So kind of documenting what topics are coming up. And then through that, you're going to be able to identify what the gaps in the literature are, and that should guide the development of your research questions and hypotheses. So that's really the first step, is to read, and to practice active reading when you're doing that. So I recommend that when you do your literature search, and this will help you throughout all of the chapters in your dissertation, but the information that you are gathering from your literature search, I recommend organizing it in some sort of Excel sheet where you're documenting who the authors are, what the title of the paper is, maybe you're taking down the link, and then having some brief bullet points on notes or things that stood out from you on that paper, any future directions of that paper that may be appropriate for you to explore, and also limitations, study design. And this is going to help you get a snapshot of the literature. So when it comes time to develop your research questions or write your chapter 2 or write your discussion chapter, so writing that last chapter in your dissertation, having that really detailed table of literature is going to eliminate you having to go back, pull articles, read the articles again. You're just going to have all of that information available to you. So tip number 1 is to develop those research questions and really start out reading and understanding the literature before you get into the questions. I've seen it before where students will kind of push the literature search to later on in the process, and then they kind of get in a situation where the research questions may be too broad, or they are not really relevant to what's been done in the field so far. And then you're having to go back. So to reduce some of that burden, try to do all of that reading up front. Of course, you're going to continue reading throughout the dissertation process, but just make sure you have a comprehensive understanding of the research that has been completed on your topic, and the future directions of your particular topic before you start the study development process. Something else to be mindful of as you are working on your dissertation is the methodology. So the methodology is the chunk that takes up the most time. It's the most time intensive. It requires the most interaction with others. This is where you are going to be planning your data collection, participant recruitment, and your data analysis. So I recommend that when you are looking at your timeline for graduation, you kind of work backwards here and estimate how long is it going to take me to recruit. If you're, I don't know how many participants you all specifically are recruiting, but how long is it going to take me to recruit X participants? How long do I think it's going to take to collect data from these participants? And in doing that, really build in some contingency plans. So if you are doing a qualitative study and your method of data collection is to do some semi-structured interviews with 10 participants, let's say, build out a timeline, whether that's over 3, 4, 5 months, of when exactly you aim to recruit and collect data from each of those participants. And from your ideal number, add a week, because things happen. Sometimes participants don't answer the phone or things come up in their lives. Remember that they're kind of coming into our research studies, but this is not the focus, this is not anyone's main focus but our own. So really just make sure you're building in a contingency plan and building in some cushion so that you're not coming down to the wire, your results chapter is due in 2 weeks and you're only just transcribing your last qualitative interview the week before. So really try to build out a very detailed timeline. So in this, you'll want to include getting your IRB approval. How long do you think that might take? Getting approval from any sites that you intend to recruit participants from. So if you're working with a school, maybe you need to reach out to the principal and ask them if you can recruit at their school. So build in time for how long you may expect that response to take. And I see somebody asked in the chat, IRB. IRB is the Institutional Review Board. So typically if you're doing research through an institution or something like a university, you're going to need to fill out an Institutional Review Board application and have that approved. And sometimes they may ask questions. You may need to revise your application. So I just recommend building out maybe a month to preparing that IRB and making sure that all of your ducks are in a row so that you have the approval to carry out the research. And then from there, getting approval from the particular site that you're going to collect participants from. And then again, building out that detailed timeline to include how long you expect each participant to get through the process of your study. This is going to help you with writing the methods chapter 2. So the methods chapter should be written in kind of like a cookbook formula. It should be extremely detailed and show step by step exactly what you're doing without leaving anything out. So if you build out your bulleted list of the methodology and then you apply that to a timeline, you already have a draft of your methods chapter. So kind of using this activity to also supplement your writing, just as we did in the first slide where you're using that literature search to supplement chapters 2 and 5. This is a good practice here as well. I also recommend blocking out time on your schedule for writing. So not just thinking about your methods chapter, but also thinking about the process of this dissertation. You are going to be responsible for writing, most likely, some people do have a different structure, but you're most likely going to be responsible for writing 5 chapters. So making sure to build in, okay, once I've completed my literature search, I can write my chapter 1 and 2, or I can write chapter 2 at least. And then as you are collecting data, you can be writing your methodology chapter. So, don't leave the writing for the end. Really try to make this a continuous process where as you go through the study and you collect data and you analyze your data, you're just building on the writing that you already have, because some of these ideas are ready before the study is over. So you can be writing throughout the whole dissertation. To do that, you should block off time in your calendar for writing. I know as doctoral students, it can be very hard to take time for yourself. and you most likely have a number of different responsibilities, whether it's working full-time, family, maybe you're a teaching assistant or a graduate assistant, or you have lab responsibilities. The best advice I've ever gotten is to protect my own time. So if it means that you take on one less responsibility in the lab, or you dedicate 30 minutes a day where you have time to just sit down with your computer, blocking off time for writing is going to really help expedite the process and make sure that you are not leaving things till the end. So if you can take 30 minutes a day to just free write, so maybe just write about your topic, or take 30 minutes to create a table, once you have your participants, to create your demographic table. Try to break this paper up in chunks, and use your time effectively, and really protect that time for yourself so that you have the availability to contribute to your paper in these little chunks. And then going along with the recruitment process there. So we talked about it a little bit in the last slide. Again, things come up. So most notably in this last dissertation cycle, we saw a lot of students had to make changes to their study because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So students who planned on going to schools or going to hospitals or going to shelters to recruit and interview or collect survey data from participants were facing these really large roadblocks where they weren't able to get into those locations. This is just one example of what can happen, right? I've had other students who they wanted to collect data at a local school district, but that school district had ceased that process for the school year. They weren't allowing anybody to go to that school anymore. So to avoid setting yourself back in the event that something happens with your site, or something happens where you have 1, 2, 3, 4 participants drop out of the study, make sure that you are building in those contingency plans for both recruitment and data collection. So that could mean instead, it could mean that you have, plan A is I'm going to recruit from my local school district. And then maybe plan B is, if that school district is not available, I'm going to post the flyer for my study on a professional network for teachers, or I'm going to post this flyer on LinkedIn, Facebook, social media, whatever that is. So just make sure you have those plans and you build them into your IRB if you are doing an IRB, because each deviation that you make for your study will require a modification to the IRB. So if you change the way you're recruiting, you have to go back and put that in to your IRB, and you have to wait for them to approve the modification. And you also have to send them any relevant documents. So if it's including a flyer, well, now you have to go send the flyer to them and create the flyer. So those are areas where you could get hung up on time. So I recommend thinking about these contingency plans early and building them into that IRB. This way, when it comes time to change, you can completely change course without having to go back and get approval for changing your situation. Another way, or another helpful thing in this, is to really talk to your peers and your professors. These are people who have gone through this process of collecting data, or they're currently going through it. So they may have encountered challenges that you haven't thought of. And a lot of times these roadblocks are things that we haven't thought of, right? So reach out, ask, were there any challenges you had with data collection at this site, or just in general? Can you share those with me? And that's going to inform your strategy moving forward. There's also literature that you can refer to if you don't have maybe peers or faculty members who are available to chat through some of these challenges, but really review some of the limitations or some of the areas that researchers get stopped in the process, and try to think through ways that you can push through that to kind of proactively address these issues to keep you moving forward, to avoid having any setbacks in the process. This one is so helpful. So utilizing a reference librarian and citation management tools. This is one of those tasks in the dissertation that it's kind of like a brainless task to have to format your citations. It is one of those things that is often left till the end, and it is tedious, right? Your paper is probably going to be 100+ pages. It's extremely tedious to go back in and have to organize your citations. So the best advice I can give you with regards to this is to use a citation management tool. What these do is they store all of the citations. It's into kind of this little library on your computer, and they talk with Microsoft Word or whatever word processing software you're using, and then they format all of the citations for you. Personally, I use Zotero. It is free, and I've just downloaded it, so it's on my desktop. It connects to my Microsoft Word. I click Insert Citation, and it puts it right where I want it to go. And then at the end, I just insert a bibliography or a works cited page, and it automatically generates all the citations. This is going to cut down your time in your writing. You are not going to have to worry about going back and manually writing all of these citations. So this is a great time-saving tip while you're working on this writing. These softwares allow you to put your citations and your reference pages in all different styles. So whether your school requires APA, MLA, whatever it is, they adapt to the style that you ask it for. So this is a very, very helpful tool. I've also included here working with your school's library. So working with any reference librarians at your school. Again, this related to the literature search is just going to expedite your time. You can go in and you can do your own literature search, or you can work with a librarian and identify some key search terms for your topic. They are very well versed in doing these searches and exactly what you need to enter to find what you're looking for. So starting the process off by working with them may also expedite your time, take out some of the guesswork in your literature search, and really kind of just get you straight to the point. And then a few other citation management tools. I mentioned that I use Zotero. There's also EndNote and Mendeley, and there are a few others. But again, I use Zotero. I recommend it to everybody that I work with. So, and it's free, and this is not sponsored, but it may be a helpful tool for you. Okay. And then another piece of the dissertation process, I would say that takes up the most time. So I'd say data collection is a huge chunk. Writing, of course, is a big chunk, but writing's continuous, so it's a little different. Something that unexpectedly takes a lot of time that I've observed with students is working with their reviewers. So reviewers are not always the most responsive. So it's important to really set expectations with your reviewers early on and get organized with your reviewers. So that means meeting with them at the beginning of this process and setting down some ground rules, being aware of what their expectations are, what the style that they like to work in is. So my preferred style of working with a reviewer is to email them a copy of the paper at designated times based on the discussion, whether it's they like to see chapter 1 first and then have that emailed. Then once chapter 1 is complete, move on to 2. So those are some things that you would want to talk to them about. What is the deliverable schedule that they would like to follow? And then determining how they're going to provide you feedback. This is so important. Some reviewers will give you verbal feedback. So they'll just tell you, chapter looked good, work on chapter 3 a little bit, or, add more detail here. Now, verbal feedback is good, it's helpful, but if you can, the best way for your reviewers to work with you is to give you written feedback in the document that you give them. So adding comments to the document, or, some people are old school, even printing it out and writing in it. This cuts down time a lot because you're able to see exactly what they're referring to. Whereas if they're giving you an email and they're summarizing their feedback, it leaves up a little more to question. So if you have the opportunity to, I recommend setting a meeting with your reviewer before you begin writing and, setting these expectations, right? So I'm going to email you chapters, each chapter individually. I would appreciate it if the feedback that you give me is written in the document. Again, it's just going to cut down your time. You'll be able to more appropriately and more precisely respond to their feedback and concerns if you see the comments where they are. I also recommend setting deadlines with reviewers. So this can be a challenging thing because your reviewer is typically someone who has seniority over you, and it can be hard to set deadlines for your supervisors. But it's necessary for this process, and they are aware of that. So when you send a chapter to your reviewer or when you send anything, put a deadline in there for them. So, hi, Dr. Smith, attached is the draft of my chapter 1. Would it be possible to have this back to me in 2 weeks by X date? This is just going to make sure that you are sticking to the timeline that you've set and that your reviewers are aware of that timeline. They may have multiple students, they may have multiple classes. Again, this may not be top of mind for them. So make sure that you are being very clear on what the timeline you would like to follow is, and set that expectation for them to meet those deadlines as well. Of course, they may surpass those deadlines, they may miss those deadlines, but if you go into it with a very structured expectation, you'll have more of a chance that they'll meet these deadlines. And in that timeline that you're building that we talked about earlier, you can create cushions for review. So if you work with your reviewer on one chapter and you realize, oh, wow, this person's taking a month to get back to me, go back, revise the timeline, and build that time in so that you are not behind because this person is taking a long time to review your paper. This is also somewhere where we come in. I think a lot of the back and forth in the dissertation is just addressing reviewer feedback. If you send something to a reviewer, don't be discouraged if there's a lot of feedback. Sometimes it takes 3, 4, 5, maybe more. I've seen like up to 15 cycles of sending one chapter back and forth, addressing the comments, getting more comments. So something that we do is when students receive comments, we revise the chapter for them, or we guide them on how they can best address those comments. So hiring a dissertation consultant is another way that you can expedite kind of working through this process as well. But the biggest takeaways I can give you on this slide are ask your reviewers for written feedback and hold your reviewers accountable for the deadlines that you give them. And then, of course, kind of on a lighter note, it's important to keep perspective throughout this process. The dissertation can feel like a long, treacherous path, but it is just a snapshot in your academic career, in your professional career. So as you're going through, make sure that you are keeping perspective, you're taking time for yourself. I always recommend positive reinforcement. So in your timeline that you create, you can add areas for, okay, when I finish chapter 1, what self-care item or what am I doing for myself to reward myself for chapter 1, for just having it completed, right? So make sure that you're rewarding yourself because, again, it is a long process and it can be easy to burn out if you are just going the whole time. Seek support. So writing groups are a great way to seek support, to have that kind of outlet where you're getting to take a bit of a break, but you're also still working on your dissertation. So any writing groups through your school, through your library, it's a great time to make sure you are also protecting your time. So if you have a hour-long writing group once a week, you know for a fact you are going to get in time to work on your dissertation during that hour. So reach out to your peers. You can even start your own writing group if one isn't available to you. And they're a great way to hold yourself accountable. It's a lot easier to skip your hour of writing if you're at home and your favorite TV show's on. But if you know that you're going to be meeting with a group, then it's, a little bit harder to skip that time. And then of course, take breaks. So in your timeline, determine when you can pause or when you can take a weekend or a week to just kind of soak in what you've done, get away from it, and then come back, kind of re-energized. This is going to sustain you through the process. It can take, some people take years on their dissertations. Ideally, of course, I know everybody here wants to finish in 1 year, but even in that expedited year, you may need a weekend to just get away from it. So do that. Do not feel guilty to take the time away. Just plan accordingly so that this weekend away or a day off is not going to set you back. And then another way to really expedite this process, again, is to delegate tasks. So I've talked about working with a dissertation consultant, and I've talked a little bit about the services that we offer. So we help with editing each of the chapters. We also help with data analysis, creating your proposal and defense PowerPoints. So those are some tasks that can be helpful. Other things that you may want to consider delegating that are just tedious and take a lot of time. If you are doing a qualitative or mixed method study and you are interviewing participants, you may want to send your transcripts out, send your recordings out to be transcribed to a company. Of course, it takes so much time to listen to your recordings and transcribe them yourself, write down each word. So if it's available to you, a transcription company is going to turn those around most likely much quicker than you can. Another way to expedite time with transcriptions is to use some type of software. So for example, Zoom video conferencing has a transcription feature. So you can, as you are interviewing and recording participants, you can have a software transcribing that data in real time. So that's another option. Otter AI is another website that I've seen students use for transcription. Now, if you choose to do it yourself, the one thing to consider or to be careful with is just make sure that you are going back and checking the work of the software. So for example, Zoom, I know it's very sensitive to recording. So sometimes your transcript might, it might break the lines, or for example, if you say or if you breathe, it might pick up something that isn't the word, or the words might be incorrect. So this will definitely cut down hours of time just writing down those transcripts, but just make sure that you are doing some quality checks to ensure that what the software is giving you is correct to the recording that you have with your participant. Another area where you can delegate is your APA editing. So once you've completed your dissertation or throughout, you are going to want to make sure that it's meeting the formatting guidelines of your school. This is a really important piece. I've seen students get kind of delayed in graduating because they did not meet the editing guidelines, which is so sad because you've worked so hard on this paper. And, to be set back because your page numbers were incorrect or your headings weren't level 1 or whatever it may be, is very challenging. So having someone review your finalized document and apply the correct APA editing can be a helpful place to shave time off for you, make sure that task gets done. But again, maybe you finished and now you can work on your PowerPoint and somebody else can do your APA editing for you. So these are just some areas where you can cut off time. Also, undergraduate students or graduate students are a great option for people who are eager to work on research projects. They are most likely willing to do it as volunteers because they're wanting the work experience. So there may be areas in your study like cleaning the data, or maybe sending emails to participants to schedule their data collection, that you can delegate to a student that, of course, you would need to train and add them to your IRB and make sure that they are a student that's going to produce high quality work. But there may be some minor tasks that you as the principal investigator can be delegating. And that's just going to, again, give you the time to focus on your writing. whatever you can do to protect that writing time and just the time around really thinking through the data you've collected is worth its weight in gold. So think of those tasks that seem that you don't need to directly be doing, but you can kind of have oversight over, and identify ways to delegate those tasks out. That's going to ensure that you can work on what's most important in this paper and throughout this research process, and really take the time that you need for that. But that is my last tip for today. We do have a number of different webinars. So if you are working on chapter 1, we have a webinar dedicated to chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Same thing for all of those. The link to our webinar archive library is in the chat. And we also offer a complimentary 30-minute consultation. So if you are someone who says, I might actually be able to use a dissertation consultant, or that may be something helpful, or I'm interested in APA editing, or I just want someone to pull articles for me for my literature search, reach out to us by email or phone, and we can talk through how we can best support you. But now I will open it up for question and answer. So if you have any questions, whether it's about time or any of the chapters in the dissertation, feel free to put those in the chat and we can talk through those together. Okay, so I see a question. What is IRB? IRB is the Institutional Review Board. So typically with your study, you'll have to put in an IRB application. I will put a link in the chat to give you some more information on what the IRB process is like. And to anybody dropping off, thank you so much for joining us today. I hope we see you in the next few webinars. But I'll be here for a while, so feel free to put questions if you have them. Thank you, Stephanie. Thanks, everybody. Average amount of research questions. I think it really depends on what you're studying. There are some studies I've seen with over 10 hypotheses. It also depends on the type of study that you're doing. So if your study is qualitative, I would say 3 to 5, or maybe 1 to 5 is good for research questions. Possibly the same for quantitative. Really just depends on your study. But I can post something in the chat to help with that as well if you want to hang around for a minute, Kelly. And then I also see Brandy asked, is it better to hire someone for transcribing? There is definitely no cookie cutter advice on this. It really depends on your personal preference. So for me, I do not want to spend my time transcribing my interviews. That is just not something I want to do. It's tedious. It takes a long time. So personally, I would send it out to somebody to transcribe. But again, there's also those shortcuts. So maybe you use a software to transcribe and then you just spot check the transcriptions. So I would say the way to decide is to first think about the resources. Do you have the resources to send it out to be transcribed? And then second, think about the time. Determine what amount of time you want to spend on transcribing those interviews. And if it's minimal, then yes, I would say just sending that task out is going to be right for you. But again, it just depends. I will say in the qualitative studies, some people will take that time transcribing to begin their analysis. So that may be another piece of it. If you can double up that task and make it meaningful towards the rest of your paper, then okay, right? Then maybe it's worth your time to do the transcription. So it just depends how you structure it as well. Okay, I see that we have another question. How do you word contingency plans IRB for recruitment? I'm going to post some links for IRB here in the in the chat. But one way that you can do this is to kind of present the options. So for example, for recruitment, you can say participants will be recruited through a variety of ways, and then list out the various ways. So it's not that you're saying, if I don't reach my sample size, I'm going to go back and do this. You can't say that, but I think a general recommendation is to list out the different ways that you might recruit. So list out your plan A, plan B, plan C, so that you have it in your toolbox, as opposed to having to go submit a new IRB modification. So it's not necessarily saying, oh, this is my contingency plan. It's just saying, these are all the ways that I might recruit. And then when you go to carry out your study, maybe you start with plan A, but you're able to go through the others without going back because you've already put them in your IRB. Okay, for those that are waiting for links, I am pulling them up now, so please be patient with me. Okay, I see. How would it be possible to finalize all the dissertation work, including publishing 2 articles in journals, since it is the expectation of our university? Mifta, are you asking about a certain timeline? Could you give me a little bit more information on this question here? It's definitely possible. It's just a matter of how fast are you, okay, in 1 year. Yeah. I would say publishing the 2 articles may be tight, but it depends on your studies. So I think when you are wanting to do this in a year's time, it's also important to consider the study design, and maybe just make it not so complex or not have so many research questions that you have to conduct, so many different analyses for. So I think it's definitely possible. You just have to think about what are the quicker studies that you could do. So for example, maybe some type of basic survey study, where you're doing like a very basic analysis, like a t-test. You may be able to expedite that in a quicker way than you would be able to do, something that's more complex where you're looking at multiple linear regressions. So I think just thinking through what process can be pared down is going to be important. As far as publishing 2 articles in 1 year, that may be a little bit more challenging because you have to consider that your study is going to take, let's say your study takes 3 to 6 months. The time that reviewers for journals take can vary from a month to like 9 months. So I would say getting those published may be difficult in 1 year, but getting them submitted to journals may be feasible for a year. But again, I think the big pieces you have to think of are what study design can be done in a which study design can be done in a quicker fashion. What type of analysis am I comfortable with? Can I do independently without requiring a lot of assistance? And the caveat there is, of course, if you hire a consultant, they can help you with the analysis. So think through that as well. And then maybe researching journals to look at journals that have faster review periods. But if you'd like some more discussion on that, we can definitely chat. I'll put my email address in the chat here because it's definitely a unique situation. I'm going to publish a literature review and a pool. Callie, I see you're saying that at your school, you publish your literature review and a pilot study. Ooh. Can you share some more information on that? In the meantime, oh, I see. Yeah, and that's a great point, Kelly. So maybe instead of publishing your entire dissertation, you just publish your literature review as kind of a review paper or a systematic review. Oh, another option for publication, you could publish a process evaluation. So just describing the process that you went through in your study. That may be another way to do it without having your results in. You can kind of talk through some of the other pieces of your study. What else? Any other questions? Great. Thank you so much for attending, Brandy. I hope that we see you soon. Thank you. Have a great day. Thanks, Janice. All right, everybody, I'm going to close out the session. Again, thank you all, and do not hesitate to reach out if you need assistance with your work.